And this is from Top G in Texas, who wants to explain how to quantify spirituality. So, hi, Top G.
Yes.
Yes, because I heard you talk about it earlier in the show, and
Yeah,
so
that's
I
what we
thought
wanted to talk about. Yeah, definitely.
I wanted to make a suggestion to look into the neuroscience of religion if you haven't, and you'll find there that they will induce these type of spiritual experiences in their volunteers, and so that would be one place to start if you wanted to quantify what people mean when they speak of spirituality. I understand a lot of people have different connotations and mean various things, but one good place to start is in the established neuroscience that's been done.
But well, with that, because we don't have the ability to just look that up right here and talk about it. You seem to
Right.
know something about it. Can you please explain it to us real quick?
Please do.
What the connection between the neuroscience and spirituality is?
Sure. The term that's used at Bigfoot is after William James' work in the early 1900s, which has been refined and defined throughout decades of research. So we're talking about studies that have gone on since the Mars Chapel experiments of the 1960s, even to the more modern studies with Dr. Roland Griffiths and his team in Baltimore, Maryland, where
All right.
they
Instead,
use
but what I'm asking you to do is tell us what it is, not who's doing it, but what it actually is and what the connection is.
Right.
Okay, so they induce in their volunteers, after William James' term, what they refer to as a mystical experience. And that's the term that you'll find in the West. If you go to UK, they call it a reduction in the default mode network, which is the areas of the brain responsible for self-reflection. In other words, your what Freud might call the ego, where it's like, I'm going to do this tomorrow. I did this yesterday. I'm making these plans. Those self-referencing areas of the brain are diminished inside the experience. And so that's one stepping stone into how they quantify these experiences, which they call spiritual or mystical.
Yeah,
And it
what
has
you're
a lot
doing
to
is,
do.
what are you trying to communicate, that there are certain parts of the brain that can be stimulated to create these experiences?
No, definitely. Yes, they can be stimulated. Perhaps you've heard of the God helmet.
Yeah.
It was like a motorcycle helmet that was fixed with these magnets. It's like a customized motorcycle helmet, and
Hmm.
of course, and then there's studies that where they use certain psychedelics. They've also had nuns who have a lifelong practice with contemplation, the Carmelite nuns, which they studied under fMRI. And, there's been a lot of studies done in this area. So, I mean, if you're wondering how to quantify it, that's as
Well,
much that's what I'm.
I'm not trying to quantify the experience. I think we can do that. What I'm trying,
Yeah.
or not the actual workings behind it, but what I want to quantify is what people are experiencing when they're going through this. When somebody says, "I did something spiritual today," what is it that they mean by that?
Right.
That's what we're trying to get an
Yeah,
answer to.
yeah, and that's not easily understood, especially if you haven't had the type of experience that these people are talking about, because it deals with the dropping of your ego, of your ordinary sense of self. And so,
Uh,
that's
uh,
what people. So people, yeah,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry. I was asking you because I want to kind of go back really quickly to this induced state that people would be subjected to in order for them to have said experience. Um, how is the induced experience that your brain then your brain does something equate to that being a spiritual experience?
Well, I think this term, I mean, this way that I was trying to attempt to define it in it. So, you have this perception that I'm speaking to you right now, you're speaking to me. you know, and you're like Cynthia talks to Top G talks to Cynthia. Well, that ordinary sense of self that you have no longer is entailed within that experience. And it's not like it's replaced with a kind of nothingness, like there's nothing there. What people tend to experience is kind of an enmesh of, like, let's say they might have an impression where all time, past and future, are collapsing into the moment, or they'll have an impression where they see consciousness as unified with all people.
Can I ask you a question, Top G? Have you had one of these experiences?
Yes, I have. And it's the whole reason I started diving into the studies and started studying comparative religion to look more into this phenomenon.
Okay, because you keep saying people have, you know, other people have this, but what I'm more interested in is what you experienced.
Yeah, and what induced
but
it?
And what led you to believe that this was, and what led you to believe that this was a quote unquote spiritual experience?
Yes.
Well, the reason I say it in such a way is because I don't see it as exclusive to myself. When I read a description, I'm like, wow, this is exactly what I felt. It seems to be like a universal phenomenon in consciousness.
Okay, well, what I'm asking, though, is for you to explain exactly what it was you felt.
Right, please do.
Yeah, so, you know, the ordinary that I have, you know, is no longer there. You know, in psychology, they refer to it as ego death. And so, you know, there is no longer myself in an ordinary sense that I understand, you know, myself.
Okay, but how did you get to that point? What was the experience that got you to that? You jumped from the before the experience to after experience, but I want to know about the experience itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've had it through meditation. I've also had it through a near-death experience. I've had it through psychedelics. So there's not one specific way to get there.
I didn't ask about how you got there. I was asking you to describe the experience.
Well, no, well, this is what I'm saying, that it's not easy for someone to do that because we understand things in tense time. We're like, you know, we're talking right now, we might do this tomorrow, but no such thing exists there. There is a sense of like timelessness, like all time, past and future collapsing into the moment. And that's not easy. That's not something very easy to describe to someone who's never experienced it before. And so,
well, how do you? So I'm sorry, I need to jump in here. So you experienced something and you were induced in through meditation, sometimes psychedelics, etc. How did this lead you to saying that this was spiritual?
Because well, aside from, you know, losing a sense of an ordinary sense of self or a sense of time, it was also filled with something that the Christians call agape, but it's translated to unconditional love. So I saw in that experience, I glimpsed a sense of a complete, infinite, unconditional love for all people and things, nothing excluded. And
so how's that spiritual?
That was, how is unconditional love spiritual?
Yeah. Yeah, how's that spiritual?
Like when I think of the word spiritual, I'm thinking about something that has to do with spirit.
Yeah.
So you can unconditionally love people without spirit, right?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I think that's a misconception I had as well. I thought of spirit as something airy-fairy, as something, I didn't think of it as something we could actually experience, you know, and I think that's there's this conception that I think of spirit, you know, they watch Hollywood movies and they see the Patrick Swayze as the ghost and they think of the disembodied, you know, entity that he becomes outside of his, you know, his material body. And
I actually wasn't thinking of a ghost. I was thinking of like some inner spirit, as most people would describe it. And I'm not sure what an inner spirit is, so I'm not sure what would be spiritual in that regard.
Well, I would relate it to this inner potential in one's consciousness that I really believe is a potential in us all, and it's simply that most people haven't had it. Most people haven't had this type of experience, but so nevertheless, it is something there.
You said it's inner potential in
Just say
one's
it one more time.
consciousness. You say it's inner
Yes,
potential
that's
in one's consciousness. That is
yes,
that what you are is that what you are defining as spiritual?
yes. That I would put it that way. That's one way to put it, definitely.
How is that
Because
spiritual?
if it's an inner potential in your consciousness, I really believe the way it relates to spirit is because, like you said, it's inner. It's inside one of us. I think it's what led people to even develop the religious vocabulary in the first place. Words like God, or it doesn't matter which religion you go to, Nirvana in Buddhism, Samadhi in Hinduism. I think these are all related to these potentials in consciousness that people have been tapping into for millennia.
Okay, so like a lot of times when people are describing consciousness, it's a property of the brain. So the brain is a tangible organ that all of us possess because it kind of tells us, tells your lungs to make sure it's taking in air. It's telling your heart to beat. It's telling your arms to move, and it's even helping you formulate sentences. So that's a tangible object. How though are we using this language to say unequivocally that the inner portion of your consciousness is spiritual?
Well, I think that assumes that consciousness is a body, and I don't think we've necessarily established that within neuroscience. I think that's why these topics are still up in the air in neuroscience and being studied, and why consciousness is still something to this very day is heavily studied within neuroscience. Because I think it's a materialist assumption to say that consciousness is something generated by the brain.
Do we have any other example that can be corroborated through a methodology from scientific method that shows that consciousness is not a property of the brain?
I don't think it's necessarily that it has to be something else, a property of something else outside the physical brain. I think it's more in the sense that and how it operates within the physical brain.
Are you
I think
saying
that's
this is
the
what you
point.
think, or this is what you know based on science that you've read or have gotten from other people who have studied this?
Well, what I'm saying is that there's no established case in neuroscience that for either one, whether I'm going to argue for one model or whether you're going to, someone tries to argue for the model of consciousness being generated by the brain, there's no evidence for either or. And I think that's why neuroscience continues to study consciousness and why it remains such a mystery to us.
I'm not going to say that I'm no neuroscience at all. I'm a simple social worker, but having read some papers, studied some psychology when I was in college, and even having conversations with other people who happen to be in this field, never has it ever brought up that consciousness is something that is nebulous, ethereal, anything to that experience, anything to that, at all. I'm sorry, my words are escaping me. To the point where we are just saying that happens to be something that's like intangible, or it's or something that's kind of like made up, or like can't be seen. I mean, like, or like, of course you can't like physically touch it, but like we don't necessarily have any evidence that points to consciousness outside of a property of a brain. I mean, like,
You've never
even
heard
when
about.
people are talking, anybody's just talking about like the mind, it's still property of the brain. Consciousness comes from that, still property of the brain. Like, I'm still failing to see exactly how is this thing actually pointing to something outside of the brain.
Yeah, it seems to me that you're describing something that's physiological and not spiritual.
Yeah,
Well,
especially since
I'm assuming.
we don't have any evidence that shows that particular property that you're discussing is anything outside of anything physiological.
You've never heard of the mind-body dualism or the hard problem of consciousness? In other words, it may be that, classical mechanics alone cannot explain consciousness, that what they're positing today, that we may have to relate it to quantum mechanical phenomena such as entanglement or superposition to ultimately explain what consciousness is.
Well, I'm not necessarily saying that we have all the answers right of now. I mean, like, we know a lot about the brain. And a lot of what we know about the brain. Hold on 1 second, Top G, and a lot of that we learned about the brain, especially when it comes to some of these different things that have been equivocated to something that's like metaphysical. We have shown that as mapping from the brain, and even like utilizing some like outside stimuli to show what the brain can do, like when you're seeing like like trippy shit, like when you're taking the psychedelic or what have you. These are still different things that are happening because the brain has been stimulated in some kind of way. And even though, as some people would say, well, that's your consciousness of working, or your mind is doing something, what blah blah blah, where is it in any particular place where this thing happens to be pointed to something that's spiritual, unless this is something that somebody thinks or something that they believe? Where is the science that actually backs that up? Because right now, science is now pointing to something that is like spiritual, metaphysical, intangible, ethereal. It's pointing to more so an emergent property of the brain. So where's the other portion of that?
Right now we don't have that. We're not even for consciousness being a byproduct of the brain itself. There is no established neuroscience for even that. What you're saying, it suggests there is no established science for that. Even is that was my point. And
are you sure about that?
Yeah, it just seems to me that if the brain isn't working, there is no consciousness. So there's got to be a link there, right?
Yeah. Well, I challenge you guys to, after this, find any study that establishes that consciousness is some kind of generated or byproduct of the brain. You will not find it. There is no such study that establishes that within neuroscience.
Are you
All right,
sure
you know what?
that?
I'm gonna go and check that out. But
Yeah,
we do have to get wrapping. We
I'm
do have to wrap things
100%
up.
sure about that.
All right, like I said,
Okay.
I'm going to check it out, but we also do have to wrap it up. We've been we're way over time. We were over time when I took your call, but I wanted to get you in. So I would love it if you called back again and discuss this some more. I think it'd be worth more discussion than we have time for right now. So I want to thank you very much for calling in. And hopefully you will call back again, Top G. I'll give you 1 minute to get the last word in, okay?
Sure. I wanted to real quick just go over a couple models. I'll leave you with one, and the common one that I hear when it comes to spirituality is the radio model. That, let's say the brain was akin to a radio transceiver, then consciousness is the signal that radio transceiver interprets. Then now you have a model where, if you destroy the radio, if you destroy the physical brain, that doesn't necessarily mean you destroy the signal. I'll leave you with that.
All right. I'm not sure. Thanks. Appreciate it.